Now, good, bad, or indifferent, one of the things that I provide you in this class is I at least try to give you uh, some things that you might want to take a look at if you want to learn more. And I'm going to send you these links later, but there's a couple articles in here on XML, the Extensible Markup Language, which is the subject of Chapter 22. Again, not a particularly long chapter. Funny thing is, when you look at these are two of the better articles, and notice the years. One is 19 years old, and one is 23 years old. All right. XML has been around for a long time. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, but on the off chance I have not, XML was designed that it was going to replace HTML. Because people came around and said, there's too many problems with HTML. And wouldn't it be nice, because HTML only has about 100 to 125 built-in tags. But the people were saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if we had our own tags? We could still use the HTML ones, but we could also add our own. And that was the idea behind XML, the Extensible Markup Language, is you could write your own tags. And there are still several hundred different flavors of XML out there. For instance, there's Math XML that allows you to do things with math theories. There's Chemical XML. There's Music XML. There's even Chess XML. All right, so there's all sorts of different dialects. Part of the problem they had with XML is, since people could make their own tags, sometimes it was confusing. And what do I mean? Well, there was, for a while, I was reading this article, this is a long time ago, on something that was called Carpenter's XML. And the problem is that the person was writing their own tags and they were talking about a table, like this table. All right. But they also were using table tags in the table. And it was like, which one are you talking about? An HTML table or a table with 4 legs on it? All right. So over time, what has happened is there's a lot of places that still use XML. I don't mean to downplay it. But as JavaScript has become more and more and more and more popular, all right, JavaScript allows you to do things and work with something that's called JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation. And most of the time when you can use XML to do something, you can also use JSON. So in many ways, XML has fallen out of flavor with a lot of people. They just don't like using it. They find it too difficult to use. Even though the reason it was created was for just the opposite reason, was to make life easier. So as it says, XML, again, the Extensible Markup Language, is a standard way of storing data. Although XML is often used to exchange data between applications, it can also be used to store structured data. In this chapter, they go over the basics of creating XML documents and how to store them in a file. They're giving you 20 pages. You can buy entire books on XML. I may or may not have told you, and you probably don't care, but at the school I used to work at, in the summer, they would typically offer a class at night that I could teach. And it wasn't part of the curriculum. All right. And what we would typically do is, in about this time of year, April or so, we would ask, in fact, even earlier than that, March, we would ask students and say, hey, we could teach a class this summer. What would you like a class taught on? And one summer, it was XML. So I taught a class in XML, and I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't mind it, but I think most of the class hated it. They just didn't like using XML. They were like, there's got to be better packages to use than this. All right. So again, an intro, how to work with the editor, and there are several editors that you can use to work with XML. You can work with an XML file right inside of Visual Studio, or for those of you who were in the class last semester, inside of Visual Studio Code. All right. And then we'll look at, as it says there, how to work with XML itself. So I don't want to sit there and read to you. All right. You can use XML in a lot of places. This may or may not make sense, but I want to just go over what's shown on the screen here. Okay. The first thing shows the XML version. The funny thing is, okay, this XML version 1.0 is still the version that's used. So when you've got a package that's about 25 years old and you're still at version 1, that may or may not tell you something about the versioning. Not the versioning, about the actual package and the actual stuff itself. So this says, this is the delimiters, all right, for your HTML or your XML version, and you put version equals 1.0 in double quotes, and this says you're using the Unicode file system, UTF or Unicode Transformation Format 8-bit. All right, then you've got a thing up here. Now this is a comment. That's one smart thing they did, was they made XML comments the same as HTML comments. Okay, all right. Then this is called the root tag. So notice there's a beginning products tag right here, and there's an ending products tag right here. Everybody see that? So that's the root. There can only be one root. So in other words, this is the beginning of the root right here. That's the end of the root right there. If you put another products in there, it wouldn't work. You have to put something else outside of it. So what you're saying here is all of our products are made up of product. So this is a product, this is a product, and this is a product. And you'll notice there are some rules with this. All right. So for instance, you look here, this is the beginning of a product. So this is, every product must have a code, and every product must include a description and a price. Does that make sense? All right. And you'll notice product, there's no closing tag because the closing tag's down here. Description, description, price, price. All right. And again, that's really about all there is to it. But this can be as complex as you want. For instance, we could have had, instead of like they have right here, they've got description. And then they've got a bunch of text. But if you wanted to, they could have come in here and said long description. Then had a bunch of text, and then ended the long description. Then after that, they could have had a short description. Or they, maybe you want the short one first. It doesn't matter. And you'd have a little bit of text, and you'd end your short description. And then you would end your description. All I'm trying to show you is you can have tags nested within tags. That's it. So again, many people use this, and this is what confused a lot of people, because you would get down and you'd be several layers deep. So something that was at least originally designed to make people's lives easier, in many ways, I think at least, made their lives harder. So as it says, it provides a method of structuring data using these special tags. The XML document in the figure contains data for 3 products. We already said that. XML can be used to exchange data between different systems. What's really nice about that is like JSON. So in other words, let's say that I'm writing a system and I'm using C#, and I want to be able to communicate some data with a company that James has, but he's using Java. Well, we can use XML to send that data back and forth, and that data can be formatted too. All right. All right. So as it says, figure 22.2 is going to show some of the tags used to structure the data. I already mentioned that the top one is the XML declaration. I already mentioned to you how they do the how you set up comments. Elements are, as it says, the building blocks, and that's literally is what they are. And I've said this before, it's a lot like writing an outline. All right, but you only have one Roman numeral at the top and everything is underneath there. All right, so you can have your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s and your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s in there, etc. All right, and it all works with tags. And as it says, child tags and elements and parent elements. So they give an example here. I'm not going to spend any time on this. It probably isn't worth it. But this is the same thing that I just showed you. but this is the terminology that they use for this. Okay? So again, each tag must begin, all the tags must be within brackets. You must start an XML file with the XML declaration. You must use those tags if you want to do comments. And again, when they talk about elements, an element is a unit of data. And it can be as specific or as general as you want it or need it to be. If you've got an element within an element, like I showed you just on the board a minute ago, with having a long description and a short description within description, description is a child of product, all right? But it's also a parent to long description and short description. Short description and long description would be siblings that are both children of description, all right? The highest level, as it says, is known as the root element. So that thing that said products, that was the root element. You can only have one root element in an XML document. All right. Then they get into attributes next. It says attributes are a concise way to provide data for elements. I can't say it any better than that because that's what they are. There's an attribute. The attribute is code. The value of the attribute is CS15. Does that make sense? Just like if I said to you, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? All right. The attributes would be height and weight. The values would be whatever your height is and whatever your weight is. So as it says, you can include one or more attributes in the start tag for an element. So if you wanted to put more than just a code in there, it would be totally legit to do that. All right. Each one would have to have their own double quotes in there with their own, the name equals, and then whatever the value would be in double quotes. If an attribute has an element has more than one attribute, the order typically doesn't matter. And again, it's separated by one or more spaces. All right. When do you use attributes instead of child elements? You can read that yourselves, but many times what it is it's just a decision made by the person who's creating the file. All right. And typically you do it for understandability. That's all. And they try to, compare and contrast them. So you can take a look at that if you're interested. All right. So it says you can use the XML editor that comes with Visual Studio either to create or to edit an XML document. You may or may not remember this, but you already knew that. Because a while ago, several weeks ago, when we went and we started looking at a couple of the programs in the book, we looked at those XML files. We brought them up just fine inside of Visual Studio. All right. Now, can you look at an XML file inside of a text editor like Notepad? Typically, yeah, without any problem. All right. The problem is if you use a simple editor like that, you can even make changes, but you won't be able to see the changes unless the editor that you're using supports that, where it'll actually show you when you run the file, so to speak, what it would look like. All right. So they go through how you can create it or how you can open up an existing one. This typically is color coded like this. That's usually the colors that are used. Now that said, some people find that confusing. For instance, notice the word products and product, etc. They're in a darker red where the word code, so the attributes are in a lighter red. You can go in and change these colors. But this is pretty standard. All right. In most editors, it's going to look like this. Okay, so how to work with XML? Well, notice it says there, Figure 22.5 shows the methods of the XML writer class you can use to write data to an XML file. All right. So here's different things that you can do. I'm not going to read these to you. All right. But you can basically build your own XML file from scratch by using these. Right? Here's some of the common properties that you'd use. Okay, the indent and the indent characters. Okay. Now notice if you attempt to create an invalid XML document, an XML exception will be thrown. So again, if you decide to ever read or create a program where you're going to put your own stuff in there, you'll want it to be within a try-catch block. and you'll catch the XML exception. We only have a couple more pages to go. I said I'd give you a break at 9. Let's just finish this, and then we'll be done with the lecture for the day. All right. So this is code, as it says, that writes an XML document. And you notice, again, when you write your own stuff, all right, it's not that easy. Not only that, notice it's got the path, all right, but there's an XML writer as opposed to a stream writer or a binary writer that we looked at before. There's also an XML reader, okay? So it's working specifically with that type of document, all right? So the program that they show, I'm not even going to do anything with it, but the programs, this first one here, this was the one that they had you do for, so you could add products, etc. This is the one they had you do with binary. All right, and we already looked a little bit at the code. I'm not even going to save it. I just changed the color so I remember which one was which. This one was the same program, but they did it, the first one was text. This is binary. And then the last one that they do, it's pretty much, again, the same one, but they do it using XML. All right, and the differences between them are the types of readers and writers that you use in order to be able to create what it is you want to create. So you'll notice here, products.xml. There it is. There is an XML file, rather, that is written in here. So I don't know, but let's see once. Let's see. If I come in here and run this program, and there they are, and I want to add a product. Okay, so I'm going to say code, well, AWD1100. Description, book used for AWD1100 C# programming class. Price, I don't remember how much your book was. Whoops. But I'm going to say, let's say $55. All right. And I save. You can see that it's been added right here. Looks a little funky because I made that bigger. All right. But if I go back in here now, if I exit, it's already added it right here. All right. So it wrote it in here. In fact, I think at least I'm going to go back and I'm going to make it the same size as the other ones. So I'm just going to put in here 1100. All right. And I'm just going to say book for AWD 1100 C# class, just like that. So I'm going to save it like that. Then I'm going to go run the program again. And notice my changes have immediately been updated. It's a little bit dangerous. And the only reason I wanted to mention this is with the programs that we did in the last couple weeks, the database programs, you can have your database file up, and you can have it up in SQL Server, and you can make changes to it. But if you do that and you're also working on a program where you can make changes to it, be real careful that you're not making changes that are going to affect your other changes. So in other words, there's nothing wrong with what I just did, but many people will tell you that, hey, if you're going to do this, don't make the changes itself in the XML file. Rather, make the changes in your program, because that's what it's for, and let the program write it out. All right? All right. So there's an XML writer. There's an XML reader. Okay? And kind of important, what we're going to end up doing, we didn't do it that much last semester, but you guys will have more of it in fall, is we're going to be talking about the DOM, the document object model. We talked a little bit about it last semester. But when you've got the document object model, what it does is it builds a website by using what are called nodes. All right, well, there's nodes in here too. All right, it says XML presents a simple XML document and lists all the nodes contained within the document. So if we look at this, this is how it's broken down. Now, you might look at that and go, fine, who cares? If you do this for a living, you'd care a lot. Because if it's the difference between putting information, if you decide that your company stores stuff in an XML format and you store it incorrectly, that could be really, really important. All right, so then they read the same document. That pretty much is it. All right. So you've got time. Again, you can either work on your Gen Ed classes if you need to do that. I'd prefer if you haven't started on it yet. Again, I'm going to do this right after the break. I'm going to go and make sure I can log in as each one of you. All right. And if I can do that, I prefer if you would start working on your electronic portfolio. Remember, they are due a week from Thursday. All right. By 8 o'clock at night. Okay. And next Monday, for those of you who have not created any of them yet, I will give you an example of doing that you're more than welcome to follow along with inside of Mobirise. All right. So that's all I've got.